All right, so this is a question I get uh, a few times, and when I'm working with clients, it's something that I go through. So right now in 2023, there's a lot of things going on, which is there's a lot of issues with hiring, trying to get full-time staff. People are getting a bit nervous about um, recessions and economic situations. So something that keeps coming up as one of the largest priorities for businesses is the ability to improve efficiency through automation. That sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but it's about how to approach it and how to go about it. There's different ways to do it, but the one that I found the most effective and the way that I work with clients, this is a good way to be able to structure the processes in a way where it goes through understanding, then improving, refining, and optimizing. So let me just bring up a quick chart to go through, and I'll go through each stage, which I recommend that clients do to really grasp and get an understanding of how to do their automation. All right, so here's the trends that we go through. First is creating manual workflow. So a manual workflow is about how you do a workflow, and the tool of my choice is BPMN, is how you model the human interactions in your workflow. So if you have certain back office processes from accounting to underwriting to onboarding, credentialing, any of these processes which happen, if you're currently not doing any kind of system management, the first stage is about modeling and creating an understanding the human interaction in the process. So the human interaction is about what task and person needs to do and when. So the first stage of this modeling is to try to represent what you have and to change the paradigm. So the purpose is, instead of people learning and memorizing a process, it's to change that paradigm to people being task orientated, to the information flow going through the company to relay back to a task and being what task a person has to do. So there's a few tools for doing this. Surprisingly, there's not a many. We have our own internal tool that we do for creating these models and for executing. And basically, we go through a process of creating a BPMN diagram that will execute. But what it will do is illustrate a task. That task first has a starting point. Starting point is whether it's time, whether it's an event, whether it's a submitted application, or some type of trigger event, which is going to start your human workflow. The human workflow then leads to your task. So a task is made up of the following attributes. A task is assigned to a role. So it could be like an accounts payable, accounts receivable, an underwriter, whatever roles that you break your company into, you may orientate that task to a role. So thinking about as role-oriented task is like a process, like a queue or a stack, where you're kind of working through a stack, like a support ticket or something, and you're working from the top down. The next attribute is whether it's assigned to a person or not. So in some scenarios where you have a flow where it's going between people, where it needs to go from one department, goes to the next, and then it has to come back, then you may want to assign to a specific person that will own that knowledge and own that task. The next is that a task will have some type of subject and a description, which is very important as part of that task. Um, that'll explain the task, reference documents, reference things that the person doing that task need to know about to be able to perform that task. The next thing it will have is some type of form. So it may be optional, maybe not, but the ability to enter information. So a task is like a journey, because the information that you need from the beginning is going to evolve through a process. So let's say it's an underwriting process. And the first stage is you need to do a credit check, and then you need a background check. So the information gathered at the beginning, the credit check, may be the first process, then the second one may be the background, and third, it might need to be evaluated, which is a combination of those two things. So the task needs to be able to gather information and pass that information down the workflow to be able to move on and develop and for people to make decisions. And of course, the task has a status, which is open or closed or locked, where someone owns that task that's currently working on a task. So what we focus on is the BPMN, because BPMN have elements such as events, cancellation, and escalation. So all these elements allow you to do actions related around your human tasks. So for example, if a task is sitting under a underwriter or is sitting under waiting for information and you haven't got that information, then simply you may expire the task, or you may elevate it to a manager, or you may say a task that existed then needs to move on and someone needs to try to contact the customer or perform a different action which will relate to the task. And this is very common, like in application processes, in underwriting processes, where you go to a certain point, you get it stuck, then you need to make a decision. What's going to happen? Do we cancel it? Do we move it forwards? But the last thing you want to do is sitting on your list, which is distracting people and confusing people. So being this automation, the first process is modeling the human interaction and the task for major processes in a company. This one gives you a strong understanding of what your business does. And two, it gives you the control about how information flows. And three, it allows your company to shift from a people learning process. And if people learn process, you need change management, you need controls, to task orientated. Task orientated processes means that over time, when you change the processes, it won't impact individuals as much because they don't need to know the task before or the task after. All they need to know is what's happening at that point in time. Now, there's nothing wrong with people having access and understanding the process, and I believe this is highly valuable, but giving the control to the business to be able to change and control. And you'll see that this is building the foundation of what we're going to have next. So first we start with the manual, the great understanding exercise, the great visualization, and it's executable so it can be applied very easily. The second stage is the RPA stage. Why we have an RPA stage here? RPA means robotic process automation. And in many companies, they're doing an activity such as taking a spreadsheet, copying, pasting, and putting it into an application. Or they're getting an email and then they're having to format it and put it into an application. Or they're taking data from one application and they're putting it into another application. An example would be payroll. So I work with a client, they get spreadsheets sent to them, then they open the spreadsheet, they have to copy the numbers, and then they put it into their accounting system to work. And same with invoices. So they're getting emailed the invoices, the payments, and they're going from a third-party tool, logging in onto the internet, finding data about their invoices, and then copying and pasting the status into another system. So why RPA at this point is because RPA is a patch. RPA generally is not a good long-term solution, but ultimately it's a very quick patch. And most of the RPAs that are applied like very, very quickly, they can be saving 50% of the time. So I've quite seen it up to going in there and then reducing an accounting person's job, for example, 80% of their time, which before was just data entry. And now with RPA, you can just quickly create that interaction and able to create a very quick patch at a low cost to save a lot of time. This is so valuable activity. It saves so much time and it means you're changing what people are doing. So instead of people focusing more on the operation, doing the manual work, suddenly you free up their time to be doing strategic activities, improving and other activities which are adding more future value to the business than the instant value. So that is normally the next stage, to look at the quick wins and solve it using RPA. The next stage in the automation would be doing a workflow engine. So once again, we use BPMN, and all these I'll get into details in other videos, but BPM allows you to model the interactions, and the BPM model can execute, which means you can create a model which will act like software. It'll follow the instructions and go through the process. But the great thing is that it allows you to visualize it and able to optimize it. So normally that means taking the manual workflow, identifying parts in the manual workflow, and then saying, okay, we can automate this. So I'll go to my underwriting example again. So doing a background check, doing a credit check, and I've seen a lot of companies doing this manually. They go to some website, they type in data, and they come back and they get the results, format it, and process it. So the automation would be take that manual flow, take the tasks that involve going into there, and then creating what we call service tasks. Service task means a small piece of code which is going to replace that manual and that human activity. So you can run them in parallel. So you start with your manual task, create a service task, and that you'll have your developers or get a developer that will go in and they'll code in the API just for that specific task. That'll be done. That information will get fed into the system and then will be passed on to the next task. So you're really not trying to reinvent the whole company or the processes overnight. You're just taking out little bits at a time. This way you're not overloading developers, you're not waiting for long test cycles, you're not waiting for production, you're just creating the automation. Something I also like to do is take the manual tasks and put the ideal workflow that will happen in the future and then build it up from manual to the fully automated and just one step at a time. So you can just roll out little changes at the time. That's really the next stage that needs to be done. The next one, and why I put this here is because we call them service tasks because they're calculated. They're something that can be coded. They're an API, they're logic. They're something that's very structured and very in a very structured way. The next stage we talk about is AI, artificial intelligence. So AI is also a type of service task in general, but this is something that can do a judgment call. So for example, I'll go back to my underwriting or credentialing example. We have our insurance, you have all this information that's coming in. You've done a credit check, a background check, you've evaluated a certain criteria. So you're currently doing this manual, and maybe there's a manual task that says, does this person qualify or doesn't qualify? And maybe it's a score. So it's a score between they really qualify as 100%, they don't qualify as 0%. So someone gets out, they do some calculations, they read about the background, they look at a credit history, they make a judgment call. Judgment call, then evaluated to a score by a human. So what the AI can do is make observations. So it's once you have this flow of data coming in, you have a person doing this judgment, then you can start using your process automation flow, and then you can look at the before state, before the person does their task, all the information that they're making their judgment call, the after state, what they've scored it on, and then you put in a model. So artificial intelligence can assess numbers very well, can assess text, can assess visuals, can assess audios, as long as it understands what the input is and the output. over time, it's not an exact science, so it will learn how to make judgment calls. AI doesn't necessarily have to replace a person, but it can come up with a suggestion to speed a person's evaluation, and then that person can say, yes, I agree or not. If you have so much confidence in the AI model, then it can replace that activity the person is doing. And the last stage here we talk about is the optimization. So when people generally do the processes, they're not really looking at too many KPIs in the process. So, we're looking at revenue and some minor KPIs. Once you start getting into the world of optimization and automation, then we can start looking at KPIs. What is really important to a company? Is it the ROI? Is it minimizing expense? Is it the loyalty? Keeping the human interaction high? What are those KPIs? So making this automation is great, but the automation will only be as good as the KPIs it's trying to achieve. So optimization stage is taking a look, what are we measuring? How are we going to measure it? And how are we going to improve those results over time? So once you understand, suddenly ROI and efficiency may be strong drivers, but as you get more efficient, then you can start in adding other drivers such as loyalty, retention, and other metrics that you want to keep in there. Once you have those metrics, then you can look at the next cycle of optimization. So it will continue and you keep refining. The first stage is to create the baseline to be able to do the automation, start heading towards the optimization. You keep repeating, and then when you get to a point of efficiency, then you talk about optimization and the optimization stage. So how long does this take? It really depends. Depends on the complexity, depends on how many departments you want to work in and what you want to do. But generally, you will see results quite quickly. There's always some quick wins, and being able to control the workflow, it's very easy to identify errors, inefficiencies, and other kind of aspects. But the whole process can take, depending, can be very simple, a couple of months, or maybe it takes up to a year, depending on the complexity. But as I said, it's cyclical, and you don't want to deploy everything on day one. You really want to take the wins. So generally, it's going to be quick to, once you got your model, to start making gradual improvements. And when I say gradual, I've seen RPA making impacts, saving people 4 hours a day, 6 hours a day, orchestration engines, reducing a lot of labor effort. And then, as I said, refocusing the labor effort to more creative and things that are going to contribute to the business much better than just doing activities. The AI is great because at one point, the AI will be able to make better judgments than the human. It'll become superhuman just because it can analyze much more data than humans can do. So this is really going to be a strong point in the process. And as I said, optimization, when you got everything working, sitting well, now it's the time to really push on the gas and take it to the next level where you really want your system to be. So that's the approach that we take to automating a company. It's something that, as I said, if your systems are well organized, it can be quite quick. If you feel like your company is quite chaotic, you don't know what's going on, people aren't really following any processes, then it's a great exercise in understanding what you actually do, but it's obviously going to take more time. But it's really an investment into strategy rather than just labor. So strong strategy will lead to strong results over time. So anyway, that wraps it up. Later, I can go through different aspects into more details, some more examples of how each of these elements work.